Hey, what's up guys? So it's that time again where we go through about 5 different Steam pickups that I've had lately and kind of take a look at how they perform on the Steam Deck and what the game experience was like overall. And I've kind of done this format in some form or another over the past couple of years, but now I think I'm going to start to formalize it a little bit in so much as I'll probably start putting these into their own dedicated playlist so that I kind of just have this ongoing kind of ever-building library of games that I've actually tested on the Steam Deck. But all of that being said, let's go ahead and hop into the first game on this list, and that would be Shadows of the Damned Hella Remastered. And I actually already have a PS5 copy of this game physically, and as a game that harkens back to the early 2010s, I was pretty sure this would be a fun game to test on the Steam Deck, so I figured why not take the leap. Especially since I caught it on sale and it was only like 16 bucks, I think, and man, I just can't believe that I slept on this game for so long because right from the opening credits, I was immediately reminded of some of my favorite creators who'd worked on this game, including veterans like Suda51, Shinji Mikami, and Akira Yamaoka doing the soundtrack, which is just incredible. Collectively, those guys have spearheaded or worked on games like the original Resident Evil, Dino Crisis, No More Heroes, and Silent Hill, just to name a few. So yeah, right from the jump I was pretty excited, and I couldn't believe that I put this off for so long, and suffice it to say that once the action gets going, it doesn't disappoint if you're hungry for that early 2010s era of schlocky video games. And I know I throw that term schlocky or B-movie aesthetic around a lot, but this is way up there in terms of actually capturing that feeling. It's edgy in all of the right places, and it is just rife with over-the-top, crass, juvenile humor that I personally love, so if you're a little bit more of an elevated gamer who demands to only play games that you would call high art, you might be a little bit disappointed here. But hey, if you are a total cretin who's as much at peace watching a Wes Anderson flick as you are watching something like, I don't know, Jason Statham's immortal classic Crank, you are going to feel right at home because this is way more like the latter. In the game, you'll be playing as Garcia Hotspur, a demon hunter who has gone to the City of the Damned to save your girlfriend from a demon named Fleming who kidnaps her, and I just love this setup. Straight to the point, minimal fluff, and just a whole lot of cheesy, audacious nonsense in the lead up to the kickoff. After you get on your way with your trusty sidekick Johnson, who I believe is a lesser demon skull buddy of sorts who can shapeshift into a torch or a melee weapon, or the other weapons you have at your disposal like, and I'm not joking, your pistol which is called the Boner, you'll find it's pretty standard over-the-shoulder third-person action without a ton of fluff. Although interestingly, it does include a dedicated quick turnaround button when you press A, which, I mean, I guess I found it useful. It's just really odd having a third-person action game with a quick turnaround button, even though it was in Resident Evil 4 if I'm remembering right. And also, like Resident Evil 4, you can target individual body parts of the demons you're squaring off against, and at least in the early game, they're lumbering enough that you can take your time, or pretty easily dodge roll out of the way as needed. Visually, it feels like a graphic novel come to life, and I couldn't stop thinking of The Darkness when I was playing this game, which did seem to have a similar aesthetic. It's a dark game to be sure, which makes perfect sense venturing into the realm of the dead and all, but I really do love the color palette they've used here, which is just incredibly vivid, and I'm sure it's going to look absolutely stellar for any of you fancy pants OLED Steam Deck owners out there. I was also pleasantly surprised with the voice acting on display here. Despite the fact that some of the lines are completely bonkers, they're all delivered believably with just a little bit of self-awareness for good measure, which is just pitch perfect since the whole ordeal feels like a Robert Rodriguez movie. Don't get me wrong, it's still very much a product of its time and definitely has a certain clunkiness about it, but by and large I'm having a blast with it so far, and I can't wait to see where Hotspur and Johnson end up next. As for Steam Deck performance, it's rock solid at 60 FPS in my testing so far, which probably isn't surprising for a game that's nearly 15 years old at this point. The only thing that kinda spooked me was the option to launch into a sub-program to customize keyboard controls, which kinda fires up right when you launch the game. I didn't change any of the options you see on screen now, although once I loaded in, all of the controls worked immediately with the default layout. As for tweaking for performance, I don't know that you'll really need to, but even if you felt compelled, there weren't any real PC graphics or video options that I could find in the in-game menu to adjust, so yeah, pretty much a great out-of-the-box experience all around, which is exactly what I like to see from my Steam games. So if you're feeling wistful about the early 2010s and you just want to play a crass, over-the-top adventure that's filled with naughty language and innuendo, I imagine Shadows of the Damned Hella Remastered will fit that bill perfectly. But now let's check out a little bit more horror with what I guess you would call a remaster of a game that I meant to feature in a previous emulation video, but ultimately I did not because its controls were kinda wonky, and that would be Dementium The Ward, which just released at the end of last month on Steam. And if that sounds familiar, good on you, because this would be one of the only true horror games that came out to the Nintendo DS. And in fact, again, I really did want to feature this in a prior emulation video about the DS, but the controls were just a little bit too cumbersome for the form factor of the Steam Deck's touchscreen, and because I didn't feel like wrestling with them to get it to a comfortable state, I figured now that there's a native PC version to enjoy, I would just do that. In Dementium The Ward, you wake up in an abandoned hospital with no memory and a range of spooky monsters lurking in the dark. And you'd be forgiven for not remembering this game because it scored decently with reviewers back during its original release in 2007. but it seems like anytime I bring this game up, almost nobody remembers it. Which is weird because despite these okay reviews, it still managed to sell over 100,000 copies, but anyways, let's talk about the game itself. It's played from a first-person perspective and largely consists of exploration, puzzle solving, and light combat. Initially, you'll have nothing at your disposal as you get acclimated with it, but before long you'll acquire a baton, a handgun, and a flashlight for exploring its various environments. And honestly, they look pretty great by DS standards, and it's bonkers to me that this game just got remastered out of nowhere in the first place. The darkness is totally oppressive, and while you don't need to use your flashlight necessarily all the time, it's definitely helpful for at least getting some idea of where your enemies are, because without it, the distance at which you can see those enemies closing in for attack is just uncomfortably close. Granted, it is kind of annoying switching between the flashlight and your weapon over and over, kind of like how Doom 3 was at launch, but it's effective just the same. It has a decent Resident Evil style map for helping you navigate the areas you've already explored, and those that are still blocked off, although for some of the puzzles you will have to actually write down or remember codes as you progress. Sadly, one of the neatest features from the original release was a notebook that you could physically write in using the DS's stylus, but that functionality is stripped out here even if the notebook still shows up in your inventory. My only real technical knock against the game is that its audio can be a little bit grating at times. Oh, and there are also some filter options available for the visuals, which largely that's a matter of personal taste, but personally I do think this game looks much better with the CRT filter engaged to give it that grimier look and a little more oomph to the environmental textures. From a performance standpoint, it's rock solid on the deck also, with no real graphics options to adjust. And the controls work totally fine out of the box, although I did dig into the options pretty much immediately to crank up the sensitivity for looking around since it felt way too sluggish at first. Overall, Dementium the Ward is a spooky little time capsule of a game that honestly was pretty ambitious for trying to squeeze this sort of experience onto the DS hardware at the time. And while it's certainly on the shorter side at about 4 to 5 hours, if you're looking for some unsettling handheld atmosphere to play before bedtime, Dementium is definitely worth checking out if you're a horror fan. And speaking of retro horror, this next title represents a nod to the Resident Evil and Silent Hill experiences of yesteryear, Flesh Made Fear. And admittedly, this one is a little bit of a cheat because I didn't even know about this game, but the developers were kind enough to hit me up and offer me a key, so if you're watching Tainted Pact, thank you again for the kindness. And right from the jump, when they say that they're paying homage to greats like Silent Hill and Resident Evil, boy howdy, they ain't kiddin', and it skews way more towards the latter. And at first I was a little bit skeptical because, I mean honestly, there's no shortage of Resident Evil clones out there, and while a lot of these certainly get the look of those games right, you know, steeping everything in a low-poly 5th-gen aesthetic, things like pacing or mechanics are usually a little bit dicier, but Flesh Made Fear is truly firing on all cylinders here. The game kicks off with an intriguing setup. A doctor named Victor Ripper, who previously worked on the MKUltra project, decided that what he was able to achieve in mind control experiments during that project didn't quite reach the lofty heights that he would have liked. You, as a member of the RIP squad, are tasked with tracking him down after a member of your team goes missing while investigating some strange disappearances in the town of Rotwood. Your goal is to recover your lost teammate and track down Victor, all while surviving more than a few abominations along the way. And that whole setup does take its time to get rolling. You're introduced to the members of your team during a fairly extended van sequence that gives you a little bit more insight into each one of your compatriots' personalities and their reads on the current situation. And at first I was critical of the voice acting here since it was more than a little bit uneven, even by old school Resident Evil standards. But, without spoiling too much, I will say that a little deeper in, particularly after you start uncovering some very unsettling audio logs, that this appears to be a very intentional choice, and if you stick with it a little bit longer, I think it'll start to make more sense. At first, you'll be tasked with lowering a bridge that's blocking your progress by investigating a couple of forest paths to sort this out. And one of the things that I immediately loved here is just how many outside locations there are to explore. Because I think for a lot of horror games, and especially earlier ones, exterior locations can feel mostly like a means to an end just meant to shuffle you towards the interior environments. And that makes sense, with limited visibility, it's easier to engineer scares than in wide open spaces. But here they really give foggy forest paths plenty of room to breathe, and you really do get immersed in the setting. As you start to encounter enemies, you'll find the aiming and shooting feels very responsive, and they even took a novel approach to the stick your arm in something gross trope with a little minigame that makes it just a little bit more engaging. And honestly, that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of little design choices that make this feel so polished. Even when you're choosing to start your adventure as either Jack or Natalie, it clearly tells you what advantages each character has, along with what unique areas each of them will get to see, which is a really nice touch. On the performance front, it runs great on the Steam Deck at standard settings, staying close to 50 FPS most of the time, although I found the medium graphics setting allowed it to stay mostly at 60 throughout. Although to be fair, I really didn't even notice it in that first hour that I wasn't hitting 60 FPS, probably because the more lo-fi aesthetic just sort of clouds that for me. Oh, and you can enable a CRT-ish filter for the visuals if you'd like, although I did find it to be a little bit too aggressive in this case between the heavy scan lines and vignetting at the edges, so ultimately for this game I opted to leave it disabled. Ultimately, it plays great overall on the Steam Deck, and now that I know there's going to be more to explore playing as Natalie, and likely collectibles that only she can get on her path, I can't wait to wrap this one up and start it all over again. But next up, let's cool off on horror for just a minute to go the polar opposite direction with a colorful, bold beat-em-up that is definitely the biggest surprise on this round of testing Steam games, and that would be Jitsu Squad. Jitsu Squad is a super vivid beat-em-up about 4 animal warriors who have to stop an evil sorcerer from using a legendary stone to gain immense power. You can play as Hero, Baby, Jazz, or Eros as you blast through waves of different enemy types from ninjas to demons, yakuza, pirates, and the like. And this had been on my wishlist for a while apparently after it was suggested by Captain Grid in the comments a while back, so Grid, if you're watching, thank you so much for the suggestion. And after I saw that it was on sale for just $1, I figured why not roll the dice, and man, this might be one of the best sale purchases I've ever made on Steam. At its core, it is standard beat-em-up fare that's a clear love letter to 90s arcade classics like the TMNT arcade game or X-Men. And usually when I see a game like this, I assume it's just going to be sort of okay but be pretty lackluster mechanically. But Jitsu Squad honestly surprised me with how much it mixes up the formula. You can parry, dash, pick up power weapons along the way, and it feels like you're just fed a steady stream of new technique unlocks that aren't just fun to use, but also very easy to remember how to use, which is great if you're someone who gets intimidated by fighting games that just throw rows and rows of button combos at you that you'll probably never remember. Or at least I know I don't. Even the basic chain attack of hitting the attack button repeatedly has some nuance to it, because while you can swing away wildly, if you pause briefly in between each hit, your attacks will get stronger, and there's a nice visual indicator of electricity crackling around your character to let you know when to follow up. All of this is to say the Jitsu Squad just nails a perfect balance of approachability and depth, letting you hop in and have fun whatever your skill level. So whether you're just wanting to do some fun 4-player couch co-op with friends, or if you want to be a total tryhard and find the most efficient way to decimate your enemies while shooting for a top score, you can do that too. About the only knock I have against the gameplay is that occasionally hit detection can seem kind of off as you try to line up your character with the appropriate lane as the current enemy you're slugging away at, but honestly I feel like that's an issue that plagues most beat-em-ups and isn't a problem that's unique to Jitsu Squad necessarily. Also, all of this ninja action is set against a brilliant art style with vibrant character animations, and some writing that actually made me chuckle here and there. I mean, sure, it has a few obvious references sprinkled in that will either delight you or cause you to roll your eyes, I guess, but more often than not, I think it hits the mark. And the soundtrack is just jam-packed with bangers that just run the gamut in terms of genre, from like jazzy tracks to hip-hop, and straight-up nu metal ballads that hit especially hard during boss encounters. When it comes to performance on the Steam Deck, it's rock solid at 60 FPS, with no real options to adjust, and no controller issues to speak of. It's just butter smooth from the jump, which again is exactly how I like my Steam Deck games to play. Overall, it's not the best beat 'em up I've ever played or anything like that, but seeing that it only has about 200 reviews on Steam is absolutely criminal, and while it's not an especially long game at about 3 hours or so to roll credits, I'd say Jitsu Squad is punching well above its weight class in this genre, and even having only spent an hour or so with it so far, I wholeheartedly recommend it to genre enthusiasts, and if you can find it on sale, this one's an absolute no-brainer. But now let's wrap this up with a game I actually mentioned last year as a game to look forward to in November 2024, but I've finally been able to dive into it more fully, and that would be Sorry We're Closed. Sorry We're Closed takes place in a surrealistic world that's one part Killer 7 and one part Fear Effect. But the characters are super saturated, so they really do pop against the dark environment that you'll be exploring. You'll be playing as Michelle, a woman who unfortunately gets cursed by a demon and has to fight her way through the demon realm to break the curse. And now that I think about it, it is kinda similar to Shadows of the Damned in that regard, I guess. Although to be honest, I almost didn't include this game at all because it just took a little bit longer than I would have liked to really get going. For the first hour or so, there's not really any action, rather you're just sort of meandering around your apartment and a few local businesses, talking to an admittedly pretty colorful range of characters. That's not inherently bad or anything, I just kinda kept itching for more of the horror aspects to really ramp up, so I could get a feel for the mechanics and how they played out beyond just, walking simulator territory. But to its credit, it actually does a really good job of weaving in some interesting backstory elements for your adventure. And once it does get going, it does start to hit all the right notes for survival horror, and thankfully allows you to adjust the difficulty whenever the challenge feels too stiff. Although I didn't find the game to be that intimidating, and the medium difficulty seemed to be just fine, and anytime I did meet an untimely end, it was due to mistakes that I definitely could have avoided. After you start exploring the demon realm, you'll get access to a third eye ability, which will allow you to see between the realms. Naturally, this makes for some great puzzle solving opportunities, but it also lets you avoid certain perils for exploration, and target the weak points of any lurking demons you come across as you continue to piece the story together. Michelle's not exceptionally quick on her feet, but she does have a quick turnaround available, so it's not a huge chore or anything to put some distance between yourself and your opponents whenever you need to. And while mechanically it also nails the Resident Evil vibe pretty well, it puts enough of a spin on the formula to stay engaging, despite a kind of slow burn at the outset. Performance on the Steam Deck is solid at 60 FPS at 1080p, and I had no controller weirdness or additional configuration to fool with to make sure that I could navigate the environments effectively. I wouldn't call it my favorite out of all of the games on this list, but it shows undeniable promise, and the next time I'm looking for something spooky to spin up, I'm positive that I will return to this eventually, just probably not before I wrap up Flesh Made Fear. But that's going to be it for this one. Every time I make these testing games on deck videos, it's a little bit of a crapshoot since I go in mostly blind on the games that I pick up randomly, well, save for your recommendations of course. And speaking of which, if you do have any recommendations, please do let me know, as I'm trying to put together a community video right now, and I need about 3 more games to feature in that one, so stay tuned for that, and yeah, if there's anything in particular you think I should be playing on the Steam Deck, I would love to hear about it. As always, thanks so much for hanging out here on the channel and watching the videos, it really does mean the world to me. Have an amazing day, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.